first in a series of videos about the pentatonic scale, in particular the minor pentatonic scale, at least to start with before we branch out. Now, the first thing to say about this is it's not complicated. Okay, it has a big name, but it's really not complicated, it's not mystical, and there is no secret to it or trick or whatever else you want to say. It's also important to note that this will take more than 5 minutes to get proficient at, and that you are unlikely to be a star within 3 weeks of learning this scale. However, what it will do is give you an introduction to improvising and finding your way around the instrument and having just a marvellous amount of fun over many years, certainly in my experience. So just before we get onto the scale itself, I just want to talk about guitar sounds for a second. Having looked at a few different presentations on the subject, there's a lot of good information out there, but one of the things I find very odd is the amount of effects and processing that people put on a guitar when they're trying to teach somebody. So we've got delays, we've got compression, we've got reverb, we've got chorus, we've got all sorts of things, and plenty of distortion usually. That seems to be a rather odd way of trying to simplify a subject. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to use a clean sound here, because we don't want any stuff getting in the way of your understanding of what's going on or creating various musical red herrings where how's he getting that tone. It doesn't matter about that in a lot of respects, at least for the moment. So I think the first thing we've got to do is to decide what improvising is, because if pentatonic scales and various other scales are improvising tools, then we really need to understand what improvising is. So I'd like you to, if you could, just pause this video for a second, just take a minute and come up with an explanation for yourself about what improvising actually is. Okay, so I don't know what conclusion you came to, but I'm going to give you what I think is probably the easiest way of thinking about it. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to say it's a descriptive process, and what we're going to do is we're going to describe a chord or a sequence of chords using single notes. Now, the first thing you'd want in any description is a subject. Okay, and the subject is going to be the chord shape. So this is a very, very easy thing to do, but just before we get to that, I want you to just think about a couple of different little concepts here. Now I want you to imagine that you're looking at your pair of shoes, okay, or trainers, and you say to yourself, right, I want to describe what I'm wearing on my feet to somebody else. Now for that description to make sense, it has to have the subject matter, obviously, so you've got to mention your shoes. But then if you said your shoes, or my shoes, my shoes, my shoes, that's not a description, that's just you repeating the word, my shoes. So what you have to do is you have to have some information about those shoes. You've got your shoes, you've got the size they might be, how much they cost you when you bought them, what the weather was like when you went there, all the rest of it. Now you may be at this point wondering what on earth this has got to do with improvising. Well, okay, so I'm playing a bar chord here at the 5th fret. This is effectively our pair of shoes. This is our subject matter. Within that we have the root note, okay, and then we have the 5th of the chord in 2 different locations, and then we have the minor 3rd. Now it's vastly more important to get used to the sound of these than worrying about what numbers we're talking about. But it's equally important to say that if you look at a diagram of a pentatonic scale, most often what you'll see is this, and here's a little graphic. Okay, so I can follow that graphic and I can go, and I can go the other way. Okay, but it doesn't really make any great amount of sense, because having this diagram without having that chord shape in your mind's eye or on the diagram itself is really it will be like a map of central London with all the streets and none of the street names. It'd be no use to you. You need to be thinking about our description again. So we've got our subject, here's our pair of shoes. The other notes then are the surrounding information. Now, the next thing to think about is if you're making a description of something, you would do it in sentences, wouldn't you? And if it's a new language to you, which effectively this is, you'd be speaking in fairly short sentences. Hello, my name's Nick, etc., etc. So, here's a very short sentence. Now, there's nothing very complicated about that, but what it does is it starts and it finishes. And what you don't want is this. And it's like a joke without the punchline. We've got to keep the sound of that chord in our mind. Yeah, now it's... Yeah, now we're starting to create something. We're not trying to play loads of notes. And once you get the idea of how those notes start to work, then you can start building on it. But you notice the end of every sentence there was trying to get back to this. Even if there was a pause in the middle of a sentence, or a question if you will, and an answer, what I'm looking to do is get back to the root. Now, these days it's pretty easy to download backing tracks of all sorts, so it would be well worth downloading a backing track in A minor, ideally just with the one chord in it, just so you can find your way around the scale. Now, one of the other things you may have noticed when I was playing just now is I don't just spit the notes out like that, as if I don't care about it. What I try to do when I play it is I try to value every note, so I almost put a price on it. And you notice I'm just giving the string just a very little bit of agitation there. And I'm going to do a separate video on vibrato and how we get, some of those sounds. But that's, again, it's a bit of a red herring at this point, because we need to know where the traffic's heading. But equally, we don't want to practice, just playing stuff like we don't care. It's really important that you get some shape into it. Now we worry about working on vibrato, bending strings, hammer snaps, slides, all the rest of it, grace notes, passing notes as well. All of those things to come. But our first port of call is take that basic scale, keep that chord in your head, short phrases that start and finish. And it doesn't matter how simple they are. You could even, say somebody's playing something like this. Now, if it's good enough for B.B. King to go after waiting 6 bars, then it's good enough for us, isn't it? It doesn't have to be complicated. Yeah, I'm only using 3, maybe 4 notes here and there. Okay, so that's the end of part 1. It's terribly important not to overload yourself with too much. You need to just find your way around those basic phrases first of all, and then we can think about what other things we might be able to do with that. So anyway, thanks for watching, and as ever, if you could press the subscribe button, that would be great, and I'll be back with part 2 on pentatonics very shortly. Bye for now.